they're lobbying for connection in the same way that you would lobby for connection. If your partner all of a sudden started hanging out with another person too much, you would probably lobby that connection. I mean, if your partner came home and said, hey, I'm going to go spend a bunch of time with this other woman, and she's from work and there's nothing going on, I don't love you any less, I promise, but I'm going to spend 90% of the time that I was spending with you, I'm going to spend with her now. You would do whatever you could to get that attention back. And so understand that that's somewhat similar to what your child's experiencing. And so give that targeted attention, and it'll go a really, really long way.
It's a brand new day. Wake up every morning and say, it's a brand new day. Take a good day, make it great. Okay.
Hello and welcome to the Whole Parent Podcast. I am your host. My name is John, at Whole Parent on all the social medias. And this is your podcast all about how you can parent more effectively kids of all ages, but especially young kids. And in this case, today's episode, we're going to be talking about how we can parent siblings better. This is one of the questions that is most often asked. And I'm probably going to do an upcoming workshop about this sometime in the summer. So if you're not yet on the email list so that you can get more information about upcoming workshops and things like that, please go ahead and do that. It's in the show notes. It's the first link. It's my Stand store, which you can look at other things that I have on there. But most importantly is a link right there to the email list. You can just put your first name and your email in. It's totally free. On Thursdays, I send out awesome emails, which sometimes includes some information about upcoming events like a live workshop or a live training. And I'm definitely going to be doing one about siblings. But before that, I wanted to answer on the podcast 3 questions from parents, as we do almost every single week. 3 questions from parents about siblings and sibling rivalry, sibling conflict. And so without further ado, I am just going to dive right into our questions for this morning, or whenever you're listening to it. You might be listening in the afternoon or evening, I suppose, but I'm going to dive right into our questions. And we're going to, the 3 questions this week come from Ashley, Stephen, and Kimberly. So if you are Ashley, Stephen, or Kimberly, please make sure that you tune in and listen. I did have somebody let me know the other day, hey, I almost didn't listen to the episode about my question because I didn't realize that my question was going to be asked. So yeah, make sure that you are actually listening, especially if you've submitted questions. And if you're looking to submit questions, all you got to do is email those questions. You know the format, tell me your name and how old your kid is. And it can be a question about anything related to parenting. You just submit it to podcast, not podcasts, podcast singular, at wholeparentacademy.com. So podcast at wholeparentacademy.com. It's the easiest way that you can submit a question. You can, of course, DM me on Instagram or other places like that as well, but I'm less likely to see it. If you send it to podcast at wholeparentacademy.com, I am guaranteed to see it. And then I can make sure that your question goes into the right theme and category, and then I answer it live on the podcast. So this first question comes from Ashley. She says she has 2 children, Ella, who's 9 weeks old, and Maya, who's 6. So 5-year, roughly, or I guess more like a 6-year age gap. And she says, since the birth of our new baby, Maya has been feeling neglected and constantly competes for my attention. It's causing tension in our family. How can I address the issue of sibling rivalry and help Maya feel less neglected while ensuring I'm meeting the needs of all of my children, including the newborn? This is a question that I would have put had I had it back then, into the new baby episode, which, if you didn't know this, I have an entire episode devoted to sibling issues related to new babies. And that is one that I did several weeks ago. So you can go in and listen to that and get more information. But the real thing, I really want to focus in here, Ashley, on how Maya feels. And you're already identifying for us that Maya feels neglected, right? And I think that that's an important piece of this. A lot of parents don't get this right away. When you bring home a new baby, there is a level of competition and rivalry that's going to exist. And this is true at 5-year age gaps, 6-year age gaps. It's even more true typically of smaller age gaps, 2 years, 3 years, which tend to be, at least in my experience, a little bit more common. So what happens is, you have a competing force come into the family, and the older child may be really into the baby initially, may have no interest in the baby initially. It can vary. It depends. But what ultimately winds up happening is the attention paid to that older child is lessened. And this is normal and natural, and it's not a bad thing for the older child. It's a good thing. In fact, it's good to learn to find new ways to connect with your parents At 6 years old, I'm guessing that Maya is already in school. And so there are a lot of things here that we can really hone in on. But the first thing and the most important thing, and I think I said this in the new baby episode, but I really, really want to stress it here because this is true for all sibling relationships, is that one of the great cures to sibling rivalry, very, very simple cures to sibling rivalry, is to pay special attention to both children individually. In this case, paying special attention to the older child, the 6-year-old, is going to be massively important, especially because they're going to be feeling with the 9-week-old like, man, everything, as soon as the 9-week-old needs something, mom drops everything and goes to them. And there is a truth to that, to be honest. Like, new babies do require more immediate attention typically than 6-year-olds. 6-year-olds have a degree of patience. The things that they need from us aren't as immediate. And so because of that, unless they're, in some sort of imminent safety risk, or threat, which, by the way, kids will actually go out and seek those ways. They'll seek endangering activity or risky behaviors to try and get your attention if you don't provide that attention without them going about those means. Kids will also start to whine. They'll also do this thing where they kind of revert to a younger stage, although that can happen with 6-year-olds anyway, where they start doing like a baby talk thing, or they, it can look a lot of different ways, but that's the most common one that I've found, is that the baby talk thing, where it's like, I need help, things that they'd never needed help with. They've known how to put their shoes on since they were 4, but now all of a sudden they need help because this new baby comes around. And really, these are all attention-seeking behaviors. And don't hear that as a negative. Attention-seeking is just connection-seeking at its core. Kids need that connection. We need that attention. When adults feel neglected by a spouse or a partner, we demand their attention, and we can engage in some problematic behaviors as well. So this is a normal human drive for attention and for connection. And so attention-seeking behaviors don't hear that negatively connotated, but kids who are 6 years old will do that. Well, one of the main ways that we can kind of, I don't want to say eliminate, but we can curb that type of behavior is by actually providing intentional attention at the pivotal moments. And some of these pivotal moments are, like first thing in the morning when your 6-year-old gets up. When Maya is awake, I understand you might be exhausted. You have a 9-week-old, probably sleep is a thing of the past for you in some ways, although I hope that you're getting as much sleep as you can. But just try, and when Maya gets up in the morning, spend 5 intentional minutes if it's possible. Can you leave the baby with a partner? Can you, be so distant from the baby, at least a little bit distant from the baby, that you're able to get up without waking them and go to Maya when she wakes up, and provide this really targeted attention. The same thing is true of bedtime. How can we provide targeted attention at bedtime? And the same thing is true when she gets home from school. How can we provide targeted attention when she gets home from school? By doing these 3 really seemingly simple things, you can go a long way in kind of eliminating some of this sibling attention-seeking behavior, because now your child is feeling like, hey, I'm getting the connection that I need. And I've said this so many times. I said it on the podcast with Eli, if you didn't catch that one on secure attachment, which would be a great one for you to listen to as well. But I've said this so many different ways and so many different times, but I'll just say it one more time here. If you've never heard the podcast before, your kids want all of your attention some of the time. It's much better to give them all of your attention some of the time than some of your attention all of the time. So if you're constantly engaged with the screen, if you're constantly engaged with the sibling, I understand that this is the stage of life. There is a certain level of newbornhood where you're just kind of embracing the suck of life. It's not perfect. There's a lot of, things that go undone. You're not going to do your taxes in the 9 weeks that after your baby is born. You're not going to probably have a very clean house. You're probably not going to cook a lot of nutritious food. That's okay. We're just embracing this period. I like to say the first 3 months are a crapshoot. You just survive them and then you get through. But that's not fair to your 6-year-old to just let her survive. And so how do we do this? We provide that targeted attention, really, really specific attention 3 different times throughout the day. Like I said, those 3 times are going to pay much higher dividends. These are kind of the bonus times where your attention that you give them is perceived at a much higher rate. This is based on a study by Jacques Pankstaff, where he said that these are the kind of the 3 main areas of connection, or the 3 main times of connection for kids with their parents. Again, when they wake up, when they go to bed, and when they reconnect with you after being gone at school or daycare or whatever. And so that target attention is going to be huge. The second thing that's going to be huge is, I know at 9 weeks, we're starting to get into the place where maybe mom's getting out, mom's going and doing things. Can we find a way to have a mom and Maya date? Can we do that? Can we find a way to say 30 minutes? It doesn't have to be a big thing, but I'm going out with my 6-year-old, just us two. We're going out on the town, and be willing to go a little bit, extra. Maybe you get ice cream. Maybe you go to a place that you don't, maybe reserved for special occasions, whatever. Try and make this a really positive experience. Don't put a lot of expectations and stock in it. That might be the moment when Maya blows up, because she finally feels like she has your full attention and connection. And now she's going to melt down because she finally feels like, I have mom's attention. So don't put a lot of stock and expectation into how that's going to go, but just show up and be conscious and be present for Maya in that mom and daughter date, and really lavish some connection on her, right? We don't have to lavish a lot of things. We really, what our kids want most from us is our attention. And so a lot of parents, when a new baby comes around, they try and buy the affection of their older child by giving them, this or that, or letting them do these extra things. There's zero judgment for that. But the reason why it doesn't typically work is because what they're looking for is not your stuff. They're looking for your attention. And so you've highlighted that, and you've kind of said, I know that she's looking for attention. How do I provide that attention? Well, the answer is, for lack of a better term, it's kind of easy. You provide that attention. But don't get in your head that you have to give 100% of your attention to Maya all the time and you need to neglect the baby. That's obviously not the truth. That's not what you need to do. You're probably still going to give 90% of your time, 95% of your time to your baby. But how can we give that additional 5% to Maya in a really targeted way? Another really great thing to do during those periods of connection, or if maybe dad and baby can go off, or another caregiver and baby can go off for a period of time, is to sit down and do some interactive creative play. 6 years old, they're still generally into creative play. If they're not, let's try and get them back into creative play. It's really, really good for development, brain development, all this other stuff, emotional regulation. Sit down and actually do that creative play. It might be so painful for you, but can you do it for 5 minutes? I think you can. And so sit down, actually do that targeted creative play. And I think that the attention thing is going to be really, really on the back end, much, much easier to handle. So I've kind of answered that question before in the past. But I wanted to hit that first because a lot of people, this is one of the most common questions I get in different forms on DMs and stuff. New baby, my older child, and again, I have a whole episode on this, but my older child is acting aggressively or demanding my attention, et cetera, et cetera. All of that stuff is attention seeking, and it's a natural attention seeking, and it's not bad that they're doing it. It's good. They're lobbying for connection in the same way that you would lobby for connection. If your partner all of a sudden started hanging out with another person too much, you'd probably lobby that connection. I mean, if your partner came home and said, hey, I'm going to go spend a bunch of time with this other woman, and she's from work and there's nothing going on, I don't love you any less, I promise, but I'm going to spend 90% of the time that I was spending with you, I'm going to spend with her now. You would do whatever you could to get that attention back. And so understand that that's somewhat, similar to what your child's experiencing. And so give that targeted attention. It'll go a really, really long way. Number 2, Steven says, and this is funny because my dad was named Steven and spelled the same way. I have 2 sons named Matt, age 8, and Kevin, age 6. Well, my Matt is age 7. So I really like this question. They share a bedroom, and lately it's become a battleground. They constantly argue over space and toys. It's causing a lot of tension between them. We don't have space for them to have their own rooms. How can I help my sons learn to share their space and belongings peacefully without constant conflicts? This is a really great question. I'm going to call you Steve just because that was my dad, and I can't get it out. I can't call somebody Steven anymore. I know that that's probably bad. It's locked in my brain forever. So Steve, this is a really, really good question. And it's really common of kids this age to go through this, what's mine, what's yours, demanding. It happens in toddlerhood for sure. My do, I do, mine, no, all of that. But the actual time where this tends to really manifest and rear up is in that early grade school age, 6 years old to 8 years old. And so you have a 6-year-old and you have an 8-year-old. And so they're both going through this experience, but they're going through it on opposite ends of the spectrum. And this is the thing with 2-year age gaps. We can talk about the benefits of different age gaps. There is no perfect age gap between kids. The 5-year age gap can be so much easier in so many ways, but then there's other complications with that. And how do you build deep connection between people who are, really quite different in age and different in stage of development? With the 2-year age gap, a lot of parents come in thinking, I'm going to have a playmate for my kid. And that there's a truth to that. 2 to 3 years, you can really play well. Even under 2 years, you can play well with your sibling. However, also developmental stages get really complicated because one kid they can find themselves in kind of the same developmental stage, but on different ends of that. And so just remembering that both of them are in a developmental stage where sharing and understanding whose is whose and what belongs to whom, that is going to be a big thing for them. And a lot of parents do this poorly. In fact, this is one of the things that I don't know that my parents necessarily did particularly well. But a lot of parents do this really poorly. And the way that they do that is by saying everybody has to share everything, right? Everybody has to share everything. And that is a really good way to make kids feel super insecure about what belongs to them and what they have agency and autonomy over. And you don't share everything with your kid, right? You don't share everything with your partner. You might say, well, no, yeah, we do. We live in the same house. We live in the same bedroom. We, have a shared bank account. We share everything. They're going to have to learn to do that. Well, 2 things. Number one, you chose that person, right? And if you guys could not get along, and if you guys could not share a bedroom, and if you guys could not share things, and if you guys could not agree on anything, you could just have chosen to not be with that person. Your child did not make that choice. You had 2 kids, adopted 2 kids, however your family was formed, blended families that come together and there's 2 kids of different ages or even the same age. You as the adult made the choice. These are going to be the age gap. Here's going to be our kids. Beyond that, your kid has no say in whether they had siblings or not. Your oldest had no say in whether you had younger siblings. Even if you say that you asked them, they were like, 2, maybe 5, maybe even 10. They had no say. You were going to make that choice on your own. They had no say. And because they had no say, you have to understand that it's going to be a slightly different thing. And beyond that, you still don't share everything with your spouse. I can guarantee you that you don't share a phone with your spouse. And me and my wife share a laptop computer. We have 2 computers in our home. We have a desktop and a laptop. She tends to never use the desktop. I tend to use it a lot more for things like video editing and recording podcasts and stuff like that. But she also has a laptop. And sometimes I have to use the laptop, especially when I'm trying to half work downstairs, but also keep an eye on the older kids. I can tell you right now, we get into conflicts about where stuff is stored on the laptop and how that I like to store my files this way and she stores them this way. It's hard. It's hard to share things with people. You probably don't, like I said, share a cell phone with your partner. You wouldn't want them going through your phone, and changing everything around, moving everything around. And so understanding that it is a natural human desire to have some kind of personal property that belongs to you. That is natural and okay to have unique sentimental things that belong to you. And if parents don't respect that normal, natural desire for kids to have those types of personal things, then the kids will then go out seeking that stuff everywhere all the time. So if you don't allow your kid to have a certain number of things that are just theirs, that belong to just them, then they will look out in the world and try and claim anything that they can. On the contrary, if you do what I'm going to recommend here with kids who are 6 and 8 sharing a room, if you do this effectively, you're not going to have this happen. So here's what I would recommend doing. And this can look a couple different ways. It depends on how you do it. But I would say at 6 and 8, you can sit down and have a conversation with both of them. They're both cognitively developed enough where this is a easy conversation. If they were 3 and 6, this would be much more difficult. But at 6 and 8, you can sit down and have a conversation, and you can give both of them a box or a shelf. Those are the 2 options, a box or a shelf. And in their room, and this box is going to go somewhere. It's going to have their name on it, whatever. You can even put a lock on it if you want to put a key on it, but you don't have to. You're going to give each of them a box or a shelf, and anything that they get that goes on that box or shelf is theirs. Now, we're not going to do like a draft or a free-for-all. This is going to relate to generally sentimental things. You have a stuffed rhino that you really like. You have a blanket from when you were born. These are the types of things that get put on the box or the shelf. Well, John, what do you do about new toys when you bring a new toy into the home? Or, we tend to get most of our toys secondhand. What do you do about that? We set the expectations up front. If my kids are getting a $1 car or Hot Wheels car from the grocery store, they can claim, if they're both getting one, they can claim, hey, do we want these to be something that we share or something that goes in our box? What happens when you fill the box? You got to take stuff out of the box. That's what we're not going to have an unlimited. You're not going to accumulate. You're not going to be Smaug in the dungeon or in the cave who accumulates all your treasure and then you don't let anybody else touch it. There's going to be a set number of things. And I bet you when they go into that box, now that they feel really secure that anything in that box will not be touched by the other sibling, now that they feel really secure in that, it'll be amazing to you how much more willingly they take stuff out of that box and allow it to go back into the general store. So then anything that isn't in those boxes is what I call communally owned toys, which means that we got to work out a way to share, whether that's with timers. That's a really good tool to use. I have a parent who I'm friends with who just says, when you're done, as long as you're playing with it, there's no time limit. You can play with it. But when you're done, the other person gets their turn. And you can't just immediately go, oh, now I see what you're doing with it and I want it back. I like what you're doing and I see that. And that tends to happen with younger siblings, with older siblings, is that the younger one will be playing with something and then they get bored of it because they tend to get bored a little bit more quickly. I mean, personality comes into factor here too, but 6-year-olds more likely to get bored of something than an 8-year-old generally. They get bored of something and then they go off and play with something else. The 8-year-old goes and picks it up and finds something new to do with it or a new fun way to play with it because they're maybe a little bit more advanced. And then the 6-year-old goes, oh, I see that. Now I want that back. Well, in this parent's way of doing things, that was a non-factor because you could take a 20-minute turn, but as soon as you put it down, as soon as you're kind of done with it, then the older sibling or the other sibling, I should say, gets to play with it for that period of time. And you can't play with all the things at once. There was some dividing up of that. And this does not tend to work well with screens, by the way, because of the nature of screens of being so constantly stimulating. If you have okay, your turn with the iPad, your turn with the iPad, they can take such long. I mean, you should have limits on that and timing around that anyway, probably beyond that. And that's a whole different separate screen type of thing. But with toys and physical objects, this tends to work well. So timers can be the way, but the communally shared objects are going to be much more easily and welcomed, much more easily and much more effectively communally shared. So just remember this. If your kids who are siblings are really, really struggling with a conflict, a lot of that comes from where do I end? Where is my stuff? How do I have agency? Where is my attention coming from? And the other one's feeling the same way. And so if you don't give them that agency, if you don't give them that personal responsibility of these are your things, if you don't give them that individual targeted attention, then what's going to happen is they're going to continue to struggle. But as soon as you fulfill those basic needs, you'll notice how on the backside, much easier that is. Until you meet the basic needs of your kids, they will continue to seek having those basic needs met with problematic behavior, which includes sibling infighting. So just remember that. And I think that you're going to be a lot better off, Steve, with your two little ones. The last question I have here, and I'm already realizing that we're going to have a bunch more episodes on siblings. So I'm just going to call this episode Sibling Part 1. The last question I have here comes from Kimberly. But before we do that, I want to give you a quick PSA, which is, you guys know this is coming if you're a longtime listener to the podcast. So I'm going to do it really, really fast. Please, 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 if you have not gone in and rated and reviewed the podcast yet, what are you doing? You got to go do it. If this is your first episode, no worries. But if you've been listening to 2 episodes, 5 episodes, if you've been a subscriber from the beginning, please, I'm going to keep asking. And the reason I keep asking is because this is the way the podcast grows. The way the podcast grows is by you doing 2 things. Number 1, rating and reviewing the podcast. And number 2, sharing it with your friends, either on social media or interpersonally. And so if you can do that, please, 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 please pause the episode right now. It's going to hold your place, whatever podcast app you're listening on. It's going to hold your place. Go into Apple Podcasts, go into Spotify, rate and review the episode. I know they make it more difficult than it needs to be. but find the place to do it. It's a couple of buttons. Write me a little review. I read every single review that comes into the podcast personally. I don't have an assistant doing it. It's just me out here. I make all these. I produce all of these on my own. I will read your review and your insights. And, hey, I really like the episode on siblings. Let's do more of those. You write that in a review. I'll know this is the type of stuff I should be talking about, and I'm going to continue to talk about it. So last question again comes from Kimberly. And she has 3 kids. And so now we're getting into the more complex family dynamics. She says, I have 3 kids, Amanda, who's 10, Carson, who's 7, and Allie, who is 3. It's becoming increasingly challenging to find activities that they all enjoy together because of the age of their developmental differences. Amanda feels like she's outgrown certain games. Carson and Allie feel like they can't keep up with her interests. How can I offer a more inclusive environment to help my children of varying ages find common ground in activities that they all enjoy together? Really, really, really good question, Kimberly. I really, really harp on and on about this. So I'm going to get up on my soapbox here for a moment. But what you're trying to do is so massively important. We'll have an entire episode in the future, I'm sure, about sibling conflict, fighting, how we can prevent some fighting. We already had one question that kind of gets into that with the how do we share space without tearing each other apart. We're going to have an entire episode about this in the future. And what I'm going to say over and over in that episode, and what I'm going to say to you right now, is that there is no way to prevent all fighting between siblings. There is no way. You have 2 unique persons living under the same roof. These people, again, did not agree to live with each other. They're being forced into this situation with people who they probably share some similarities and many great personality differences. Also, this is the safe place, I hope, for your kids, is in the home with you, which means the vulnerabilities are going to come out. This is where maybe I don't act out at school because I'm not super comfortable. I don't know how that's going to be received by my friends and my teachers. I've got no problem being my worst self at home. Adults, we do this too. Fighting is going to happen. Hopefully not physical violence. Unless it's, roughhousing, and that's all good. I'll have a talk about that more later. But fighting is going to happen. And because fighting happens, our only way to navigate that is, number 1, we can prevent some of it, like I'll talk about in future episodes. Number 2, we can learn how to fight fair, which again is another episode in and of itself. How do we navigate sibling conflicts well? And I'm sure I'll talk about that a ton in the workshop when I do that sometime this summer. But number 3, we also have to balance out the other side of the equation. What do I mean by balance out the other side of the equation? What Dan Siegel, one of my favorite parenting experts, talks about is that there are these studies that have been done on siblings. And what he identifies the same thing that I've just identified, which is there is no way to completely eliminate all fighting from a family. It just doesn't happen. Siblings are going to have rivalry. They're going to have infighting. Yes, there's a lot we can do to prevent that, to tame it, to make it better, to, take the claws off of some of that fighting. But in general, they're going to go at it sometimes. They're not going to always agree. What's really predictive of future lifelong friendship between siblings has nothing to do with how much they fight. It's whether the positive experiences of childhood associated with that other person outweigh the negative ones. So how many times do you find yourself experiencing true joy, happiness, enjoyment in the presence of your sibling? If the answer is more times than I found myself hating that person and hating my life while I was around them, then you're going to wind up having a long-term friendship and relationship. If the majority of your relationship is negative, then later in life, it's going to be much, much harder to foster healthy, long-term, lifelong friendship between siblings. And so what you're asking, Kimberly, is a great question on so many different levels, because what you're really fundamentally asking here is, how can I have my kids enjoy each other's presence, right? And so I'm going to give you 3 really, really quick tips for this. Number 1 is that we have to get the play to be more open-ended and less closed-ended play. So play that has a natural progression, like a board game. Like, this is how we play the game. Here are the rules. That stuff tends to be very age dependent. Probably the easiest example of this is a puzzle. If you give a puzzle designed for your 3-year-old to your, I'm forgetting the ages of your kids now. If you give it a puzzle designed for your 3-year-old to your 7-year-old, they are going to struggle deeply if you give a 3-year-old the puzzle designed for a 7-year-old, they're going to struggle too much to do it for it to be fun. They're probably not going to be able to do it unless they're very gifted in some way. If you give the same puzzle for designed for your 3-year-old to your 7-year-old, instead, reverse that, it's going to be too easy and it's not going to be fun. Now add your 10-year-old into the mix. If you give your 3-year-old puzzle to your 10-year-old, it's like, Mom, what are you giving me this for? I don't get it. I don't need this. And so that's a closed-ended toy. It has a developmental capacity. Here's the window of development where it makes sense. And 10-year-olds can start to get into that adult developmental stage where they can actually play games with us that are designed for adults. It might be additionally challenging for them, but they can do things that are developmentally kind of leveling up. And so that type of closed-ended play, here's the start, here's the finish, here's how you do the puzzle, or here's how you play the game, or anything like that, video games, whatever, that stuff is really, really hard to do kind of I'm going to call it intergenerational, but it's not, but interactive age barrier, development crossing. Now, take that and say, let's go build a fort in the woods, something so open-ended, something so this can look totally different for a 7-year-old than a 3-year-old than a 10-year-old. And that type of open-ended imaginative stuff, which, by the way, your 10-year-old can still absolutely do. It's just that oftentimes 10-year-olds, because they cross into the developmental age where all of a sudden, the world has so many more offerings for them, we forget that they have a capacity to do this open-ended play. And then we just kind of focus really every time we play with them, it's Monopoly or Sorry or whatever. You don't have to do that. You can actually go into their space and go, hey, I want you to come along here. We're going to we're going to act out a story together, doing plays, doing whatever. That type of stuff can be really, really impactful and positive. And that can be this open-ended type of play, or building with Legos. A 3-year-old might need to use Duplos, but we can all build with Legos together. 7-year-old and the 10-year-old are using, actual Lego-sized Legos. The 3-year-old may be using Duplos, but everybody's building together. And by the way, the adults can too. Now we're practicing shared enjoyment, which is developmentally appropriate for each kid, without forcing them into these close-ended things. And this is where I really don't want you to do. And this is tip number 2. Resist the urge to say, you pick this time, you'll pick next time. This actually does the exact opposite of what we want with our kids. That means that the 7-year-old who really doesn't like what we're doing because the 10-year-old picked or the 3-year-old picked now resents that activity. And the opposite is true. Maybe the 3-year-old's having the time of their life, but the 10-year-old and the 7-year-old are not having fun right now. And because they're not having fun, this has created the opposite experience. Now it's, man, if my little sibling was not around, my life would be better. Resist all types of activities that make one kid feel. Now, sometimes this is going to be impossible to resist altogether. You're going to have to allow for that. Sometimes kids need to learn patience too. They're going to have to learn taking turns and sharing and all that other stuff. But when you're really trying to do these family engagement activities, resist the urge to do you pick the movie this night, you'll pick the movie next week, you'll pick the movie next. That creates a lot of competition and hostility that's unnecessary. So instead, look for things that are super open-ended. The other thing you can do is go to a place like a trampoline park, right? And you can say, hey, look, each of you are going to engage in this activity at a different level. The 10-year-old might be off here trying to do the Ninja Warrior course, while the 7-year-old is much more content to do the jumping into the foam pit. And the 3-year-old might just be content to just bounce up and down and scream their head off. But you're all having fun in the same place at the same time. And you get in the car and you go, wow, that was fun. That's a great example of open-ended play that's developmentally appropriate for all kids. And so, just start to write down a list. You don't have to be super creative. Adults require novelty. Kids require predictability. You don't have to be super creative. You can do, you get a membership to some place and you can do that thing every single week. That's fine. Your kids are not going to fault you for that, but find those places. And I'm the evidence of this. There were places. I was the 3-year-old with my 7-year-old and 10-year-old older brothers. I actually was 0 years old when my brother was 10 and my other brother was 7. And yet my parents still occasionally found places where all of us could be having fun at the same time. And when they did that, those were the moments of family fun that really, really positively impacted my life in a really, unique way. And now even to this day, I can find really positive experiences with my older brothers. Not that they didn't always, they fought with each other. They were closer in age. Nobody really fought with me because I was so much younger, but my brothers definitely fought with each other. But those positive experiences really outbalanced and outweighed those things. And my third tip here with the 3 age gap thing, right? The first one is find open-ended activities. The second one is resist the urge to do the your turn thing. The third thing is really try and reduce as much as you can competition. I am a big advocate for competition in general. I think competition can be a really enjoyable thing. I'm an extremely competitive person. I love competition myself. Maybe that's just like the guy in me, the kid raised in the 90s. I like to do fun stuff like that. But competition between siblings almost never winds up working out well. There's just an episode of Bluey that I was watching with my kids. I don't know, was it this morning? I think it was this morning. We were watching an episode of Bluey where Bandit, who's their dad, plays racquetball with his little brother. And he says, big brothers always win. And, in this episode, Bingo convinces, or Bluey convinces Bandit, her dad, that he should have let his little brother win because it'll make it more fun for everybody. And Bandit vehemently rejects this because he's just like, no, what's fun is playing as hard as you can. And as adults, maybe that competition can exist. Maybe when your kids are 25 and, I'm trying to do the math here, but 25 and 22 and 19, would that be right? Or 18, then you can play board games, whatever, and they can have it out and really go after each other. But when the developmental stage is so different in childhood, when there's so many leaps and bounds physically, right? You see this in youth athletics. Parents who have a kid born in September versus a kid born in July, and that September baby is the oldest kid in the class, and the July baby is one of the youngest kids in the class. That 10 months of development can be massively, massively different. Now compare this to your kids. They're guaranteed more than 10 months apart, right? That's biology means that every kid is at least 9 months apart. So when you're trying to navigate who competes at what level, whether it's competition with cognitive ability, like a board game, whether it's competition physical ability, like playing tag or basketball, whatever, there can be some fun in it, but oftentimes the older kid is just going to dominate, and that's not fun they may feel fun in the moment for the older kid. Ultimately, it's not fun for the older kid long term because it creates hostility. It's not going to be fun for your younger kids either. So reduce the competition. And so many of us are raised into a system, an economic system in the West that says competition is good, right? Competition is good for business. Competition is good for pushing people to their athletic potential. Competition is good for, creating jobs, and competition is good for this and that and that. Yeah, competition not good for siblings, by and large. Competition is going to lead to a lot more hostility between your children who are siblings, than the alternative. And so as you're seeking out these activities where they can all play together, resist the urge to take turns, resist the urge to allow competition to be one of those things, and then just look for those open-ended places. Now, I didn't give you any specific examples other than playing in the woods or a trampoline park, but once you understand the concept of open-ended and imaginative, I think you're going to come up with so many other things. Art is another one. Everybody can do art at the same. The product may be different, but if we're not passing judgment and value and creating a competition about whose picture is better, art can be a place. Building, again, Legos, blocks, things like that, that can be a place. Going to a place where you just have, parallel play, going to a children's museum or something, and this kid might be playing with something that's a little older, and this kid might be playing with something younger, but they're parallel playing. That can be a positive thing. Anywhere where you're open-ended, where the goal is everybody is having fun. There are no winners and losers. There is no waiting to take your turn. Those are going to be the places where you're going to really balance out that right side of the scale against that left side of your kids are going to fight. So your kids are going to fight. You're never going to be able to prevent 100% of that. That's just life. How do we then balance out the other side of the equation? And it's with this positive, open-ended experiences. So I hope that these questions have, as we wrap this episode, we've had kids of completely different ages and stages. We had two kids that were 2 years apart. We've had kids that were up to 7 years apart. We started off with the newborn question. as we go through this, I just want you to remember the main takeaway, which is any experience that your kids have positively with their siblings is going to really benefit them long term. And if your kids are not getting their fundamental needs met by you as a parent, they are never going to get along with their sibling. And they're not going to look, and I should have said this earlier in the episode, but they're not going to look and complain about you when they're an adult. They're going to look and complain about their sibling. And so remember that you are the stand-in for their sibling. So be willing to give them that conscious, proactive attention, because ultimately they're going to blame their sibling if they didn't get it. If be willing to give them that opportunity to have some agency and autonomy and own certain things and have some personal effects that other people aren't allowed to touch, because they're going to blame their sibling if they don't have those things. And you can do so much for creating that positive environment. Parallel play, though, so important. All right, that's the episode that I have for you today about siblings. I hope that you really enjoyed this episode. I hope that you have learned something. If you're a parent with siblings, make sure that you're on that email list so that when the workshop eventually does come out about siblings and about navigating sibling conflicts, you're going to be able to be on that live workshop or watch the replay after it comes out, because I'm going to have so much more than what we just talked about here. Parenting siblings is one of my most favorite things to talk about. I was a sibling. My wife was a sibling. I'm raising 3 kids. So, we got siblings in our home. This is so important. And eventually I'm going to write a book about it. So stay on the email list for the next couple of years and you might see that too. Take care. This has been the Whole Parent Podcast.